Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is a very special episode because David Hewlett is back to discuss Tech Bandits and more. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Hewlett.
How
Thank you
you
for coming
doing?
back again to the Traverse the Stars podcast. You're now showing up more than any other guest I've ever had, so thank you so much for doing that.
That's it. I've become a co-host. That's it. That's
Hey,
basically. Yeah.
anytime you want.
You got to be careful because that's what happened. Barnacules as well. Same thing. I showed up on a couple of tech talks. Next thing you know, I'm showing up on a weekly basis. It's like
I'll just send you random links, and you can show
yeah,
up to any ones you want.
yeah. That's it. That's it. Yeah. No, I love it. I just it's always nice to find a fellow nerd to chat about this stuff with. So
Well, that's why I've been really enjoying. At least I think we talked about the last show, Tech Bandits. I've been reading. I always read it. I've actually been instead of reading it now, I've been watching it now on YouTube and
oh,
watching
good.
YouTube
Yeah.
videos on it
I just
instead.
I figure like that's how this is a newsletter. This is my email of awesomeness newsletter, which I'm going to be horribly pitchy about and say go to techbandits.org and sign up for. Because this is basically this is like my response to social media right now, where I've gone like, I found it was sucking up a lot of my time and a lot of my happiness. And I thought, well, what if I stop doing more of that doom scrolling and instead just focus in on a few things that I'm interested in. So I get a number of newsletters from various different sort of science and technology sources. I will go through them and find a few topics that I like, and then I'll sort of dig a little deeper. So I feel like I'm learning something, I'm enjoying it. There's a bit of a blog element to it. I just love it, absolutely love it. I mean, late every single week, but I absolutely just love the process of doing it because it's a bit of a deeper dive, right? I find social media, I feel like you're skimming the surface, and it's very easy to get misinformation as well because something sounds amazing. I think I talked about it in the last email of awesome, the toothbrushes. This idea that all of these smart toothbrushes had been used to hack some website in Sweden, which just sounds, you're like, oh my god, that's the coolest, most awful thing ever, and also entirely not true. So it's just that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm glad you're listening to it because again, who's got time to read?
Well, I'm saying, and I think the part that we miss out too is that when you're doing the YouTube shows, you're adding stuff that's not actually in the article. I covered the article as well.
Yeah,
You're adding
I'm
stuff
terrible about sticking to my
that's not in
lines.
the article, man.
Yeah, I'm terrible about sticking to my lines. So you can just ask any director or writer I've worked with. It's just I tend to do a little. There tends to be a little bit of Hewlett getting in there.
Well, one thing that you mentioned a little bit once again, your email of awesomeness. You said you're changing the name of that, though. Is that still a thing?
I'm talking about it. Well, just because I know that it obviously doesn't mean anything to anybody, if that makes sense. And there's one of the things that I've noticed on the interwebs of late is that you could be as clever as you want with titles or as silly as you want with titles. What generally works is to be clear with people. So I've sort of been looking at a way of having a sense of fun about it, but also being a little bit more sort of specific in a these are supposed to be stories to inspire, basically, things that I have found fascinating that I wanted to dig into. And I, while some of them can be absolutely miserable. I mean, last week was all about severed feet and things.
Yeah.
I still think that there's a sort of a bit of a thrill to them. You know what I mean? It's the sort of thing that I feel like as a kid, it's almost like I've almost sort of converted. I've also almost changed Tech Bandits from focusing on the kids to focusing on the adults. Because I feel like if you can have a few cool topics that you know a little bit about now that you can then bring to a kid or bring into a conversation, and there's nothing. I mean, you can just see kids' eyes lighting up when you talk about, people finding severed feet on the beach, and then you get to sort of explain all this wonderful science and technology around how they solved that little horror story.
Well, I said, as I mentioned before on the show, everyone probably knows by now that I'm a teacher. I got to take classes to earn my special ed certification. So even though I'm an English technically teacher, apparently special ed is both science, math, and English. So I'm in a STEM college class. So I
Oh
actually have
wow!
to teach now a science class to kids who only know me as the English teacher. And I know what I'm going
Huh.
to be teaching them. I don't know why I'm teaching it yet, but I know what I'm going to teach. We did it in college. There's a edible car you can make
Wow!
using cookies, Twizzlers, some sort of icing, and graham crackers, and you can make a card out of it. We did it as a college class in different groups. So I'm
Oh,
gonna give it to my
that's neat.
kids. I'm just gonna figure out why I'm doing it. Like I like if I want to do, I gotta give some excuse scientifically to teach it. I haven't got
I,
that far yet.
I'll tell you, what's really, really good for that is ChatGPT. It's fantastic for feed. You can feed it like I'll often do this with some of the articles that I write on techbandits.org, where I'll take the article that I've got and I'll feed it into ChatGPT and say, look, give me all the possible learning vectors for this
Yeah.
topic, and it'll go through and for the severed feed it'll talk about forensics and physics and molecular biology and oceanography, and it'll give you a whole list of stuff, most of which you've thought of, but it formats it nicely, and it saves you some time. It's really good for that. I think it's a tool that I see a lot of teachers struggling to figure out how to stop kids from cheating with AI, and I feel like
Yeah.
let's focus on how we can help them learn with AI
Yeah.
instead. You know what I mean?
I just had my first kid who has now twice turned in ChatGPT answered essays. It's the first
Mm.
time I've seen that. Yeah, that's my first, my first experience
And
with
how did
it.
you notice it? Just because it was just degrees better than what
Yeah,
you?
I mean,
Yeah.
he's an eighth grader who
Mm.
his essays have been terrific.
Mm.
And the thing with when you teach English, if it's like you realize that writing's like a hand, it's like a fingerprint.
Mm.
One writes very differently. You can tell who wrote it by the style of this, and
Mm.
it's not his because you know what he writes like.
Does
So
he understand it? I mean, do you get the sense that he understands what has been written, or do you just sense that it's literally just cut and paste
my
and
understanding is
walk
because
away?
someone did talk to him about it, and
Mm.
apparently, while he was smart enough to cheat, he wasn't smart enough to back it up. In other words, he didn't bother reading
Mm.
what was printed. So when he was
Because
asked
that's the
about
other thing
it,
that's fantastic about it, isn't it? I mean, it's like the fact of the matter is, you can ask it a question, it can give you a solution, and then you read it and you've learned something. I mean,
well,
like,
if
you
if
know,
if, if he had done the reading, that'd be see if you
yeah.
thing is, if you're gonna cheat like that, read what
Mm.
gets printed, so at least you can someone asks you about it, you can say,
Yes.
yeah, it's about this. But what
Yeah.
he did apparently he printed it out. He asked the question, cop printed out what the answer was, and then
Mm.
turned it in. He didn't ever
Yeah.
looked
Yeah.
at what was printed, which is so again, if you're gonna cheat, be smart enough to cheat
Mm.
well. Look it up, read
Mm.
what you have, make sure you can answer the question. But I guess
Mm.
there's a little laziness in there, and he just kind of printed and went for it.
I mean, is there a way to conform? Like, I mean, I wonder if well, this is the problem with curriculum, isn't it? Once you've got set curriculum stuff, it's very easy for the kids to figure out how to
Yeah.
use the tools to get around it. Um, yeah, there was someone was talking about saying that they've been using ChatGPT as so they'll use ChatGPT to come up with a sample of whatever they want from the students,
Hmm.
so that they're right away they know. There you go. That's what ChatGPT says about
Yeah.
it. And then is there a way of making it like, how does this relate to? I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that someone else was talking about. The idea of like, how do you make it personal for them? So they now have to say, okay, this is what ChatGPT says about this. How does this affect me and my work? So your essay is now about how it affects you, which is obviously something that can't be, it can't be ChatGPT. Well, yet I suppose. I suppose you
Right.
could write yourself a little. You could dictate a little life story up to
Well,
grade 8, and then have
I'll
it work
I will
from
say,
that.
as a teacher, I've now leaned into ChatGPT a little bit. Like when I've had some question, I've been like, ChatGPT, in this page right here, what is this happening or is this happening? I've gotten the answer. I'm like, oh, that's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
There is a place for ChatGPT. I will say to the artists out there, not in art, because apparently that's the real fight going on right now. Is that AI art is stealing art from other people and
Yeah,
making
I'm torn on that because I think you stop me if I've already mentioned this before, but I remember talking to an artist friend of mine, and who was very, very adamantly against the idea
yeah,
of AI art. And I was saying, well, let's say you could come up with a system that could pick out what AI had stolen from, for
mm,
want of a better word. Like if you could pick out all those artists, and then all of those artists get a little bit of money based on what. And he's like, "Oh my God, that's perfect. Yes, they should do that." And I was like,
that
"Okay,
would
so
work.
what happens? What happens when I run your work through that same system?" And he's like, "Well, nothing, because my stuff is original. And I said, no, it's not. There's no way it's original. I guarantee you've been influenced by every artist you've seen, every book you've read, every television or movie you've seen. I mean, I think people are finding so difficult with this stuff is that it's not just redefining what art is, it's redefining creativity. Like, is it possible that our brains are just doing what this AI is doing, but just without, you know, without our perceived human, context? You know what I mean? Like, because some of the other thing that people keep saying is, well, it's got no life experience. And I was like, yes, it does. It has the life experience of everyone who's ever written anything up to 20, whatever the hell it is now. And again, I'm not defending I don't want it to destroy, human only art, but I do feel like there's a place for it. And there's certainly, I feel like you can pretend it doesn't exist. I mean, like, people got upset about when word processors started becoming used in general, because they're like, oh my God, now everyone's going to write a book.
Right.
Well,
right.
they didn't. They didn't, did they? I mean, and I think there's going to be, it's about how clever you are and finding our place with this technology. But the reality is creativity is all about stealing.
Well, if the thing is, if the argument with AI, and I'm not a proponent of AI art right now, because once again, I do feel it as direct theft, is that the argument is going to change soon, because eventually one of those AI companies is going to buy up one of those stock footage companies.
Yeah.
And it's be legally able to then do
Adobe's been doing it.
And
So
then
Adobe has consumed their own like they basically come up with an AI that works based only on the stuff that they have the rights to, because they're very nervous about getting sued. It's also crap.
Oh, really?
It's nowhere near. That's unfortunately nowhere as good as these vast large language models that have just ripped off everyone. I mean, I'm so torn on it, because I just don't know. Like, if someone, waiting for Godot, you know what I mean? Oh no, Guildenstern, a perfect one. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Yeah. That is a play that is it's like a knockoff of a Shakespeare play from another perspective. I mean, if AI wrote that, it would be seen as plagiarism, and using these characters. But the brilliance of it was the idea of taking a different perspective on that Shakespearean classic. And I feel like my concern is that the creativity is in how you pull these things together. Like, I think there's I'm not saying like prompt engineer or prompt wizards or anything, but the idea of saying like, okay, I want this style to be this and this and this and this. That's where the personality is. The personality is in saying, I want to pull from these various, artists, and it's going to be infinitely different from anyone else's stuff because of that. I mean, I think prompts are going to become incredibly valuable in the future.
Well, like what you just said earlier, which could once again be another game changer, and I'm not sure from ethics standpoint what the artists will do about it. When you said that if they can figure out where they got the art from and then pay the artist, I guess you would have to somehow connect your account, and then you get certain money every time it hits.
Right.
So you would see artists probably saying, go for it, because now they're getting some money out of the deal. But now the question is, now what do you do? Now the artists have accepted it. At the same time, you're also losing out on potentially having someone buy your artwork, because they're now using the AI to create their own. So it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting. I think it's gonna be very similar to what special effects might have gone through when CGI overcame the stop motion animation. Like, oh, now what do we do? They're now kind of using stop motion as
and makeup effects,
but at the same time, you got CG pretty much took the business completely almost from stop motion.
Well, and we still have a schism between the traditional filmmaking and the new filmmaking. I mean, look at Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, he basically marketed that film as a film that was untouched by visual effects, which is not entirely true, because in-camera effects are not effects. Like what? I mean, no computer effects. Really? There's no computer effects? I mean, like, I find that hard to believe. I mean, and okay, and even if it's true, who gives a crap? You know what I mean? Like, the best visual effects are the ones who don't even notice.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel like there's still a lot of back and forth on this stuff. I mean, I remember not very long ago, my film friends, I mean, well-educated, professional filmmakers who could not believe that video was ever going to replace film, ever.
Really?
Yeah, because it doesn't have the same this and the same that. And I'm always like, we're just seeing today, it's only getting better. All of this stuff is only getting better. Do we need 8K? Probably not, but it's only going to get more and more clarity.
Well,
You know,
so like I think it was Spielberg and was it Scorsese who
mm,
said who talked against movies going directly to streaming, but was like
mm.
that's the future, guy. People are not going to go to theaters.
Yeah, until they got given a giant payday to put it
Oh,
on
true,
the
true.
streamers themselves. I mean, it's just money. I mean, yeah, I just, I mean, it is, we are at an absolute, you know, um, paradigm shift when it comes to film and television right now. I mean, certainly. And I think education and I think probably coding and a bunch of AI is like I did ADR today. So, I posted a little thing on social media today of me, making silly noises into a microphone for a living. So ADR is automated dialogue recording. After you've shot a film, you go in and sometimes there are lines that someone made a noise on or there's too much background noise and you have to re-record the line to sync up with your mouth that so that you can recreate it. Well, the reality is now technology means you could just put in all the lines I've said before that,
Mm.
have it spit out something in automatic, or I could just say the line and it'll automatically sync it up to my mouth.
Mm.
So, I worked on a film recently where there was a shot that wasn't working because the actress was looking straight ahead and they really needed a shot to like motivate this move. It's very hard to just cut from someone standing there to someone looking over there. You know what I mean? So they literally digitally made her look down and across they created an acting choice for them. So I'm both horrified from an actor standpoint. You're like, oh my God, no, that's like someone's taken away after the fact. You're powerless to change a performance.
Yeah.
They can change it. And at the same time, the nerd in me is like, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. So I
Well,
always feel like I straddle both worlds on this
well,
stuff.
for the Oscars, like I said, you can't make someone cry if you want them to cry now.
Yeah.
You can make the best performance. So now you're awarding the best actor or the best special effects?
Yeah. I mean, I think they should, I think there should also be a marketing one because the fact of the matter is Oppenheimer and Barbie should have got nothing. I don't think have got little to do with the movie and almost all to do with marketing. Because if you can get people out to the theater for the first couple of weekends to get some big numbers,
Yeah.
that will drive people to the theater. I mean, it seems, and there's a lot of controversy there was controversy over the Barbie movie. I'm like going, guys, listen to yourselves. You're having a controversy over a movie about a freaking doll.
Right.
Oppenheimer, for as beautiful as it was, it felt like the rock musical of Oppenheimer. Like it was just all these beautiful slow shots and stuff. And I'm like, I still feel like I got much more of an understanding and a connection with Oppenheimer from documentaries, that have been out there before. I was disappointed because I felt like what is this movie about? Like I don't, I feel like there's an out of there's an out of touch quality to I think Hollywood, especially with these big movies.
Mm.
I mean, look, a fascinating example was like I went to the theater to go and see Godzilla -1. Fabulous, like reimagining of Godzilla, but they still managed to make it feel like a guy in a suit. You know what I mean? It's like, which is silly because it isn't. It's beautiful. It's beautifully done, but it still had a certain realistic quality to it because of that. So I'm in a theater that's like 3/4 full or whatever for Godzilla -1. There's nobody in Aquaman, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, like this is Hollywood has just gone. They're spending millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on movies. And Aquaman, I'm sure will do really well, and bless Jason with it. But the reality is, we've been looking at superhero movies that are basically the same story in some way, shape, or form for the last 20 years now.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I'll say, as I think I mentioned off there, I do publicist work for any comic books, and the marketing
Mm.
campaign for Barbie and Oppenheimer, I am so envious of that. That was such an ingenious level of
Mm.
marketing to combine those movies as part of a marketing campaign. I'm just really impressed by that whole thing.
But it's also insidious because the reality is, I think a lot of people felt that that was an internet thing that happened. That was
Mm,
just an organic thing that happened. Barbie and Oppenheimer. I look, not no conspiracy theories. I'm not basing this on data, but I guarantee you that was a marketing campaign that was, like a fine spice across the internet. You give a few influencers that idea,
mm.
and or even maybe you're motivated by someone who does post something like that. Wow, that's a crazy idea, let's run with it. This is all marketing. I think what's sad now is the internet doesn't have the same checks and balances that the television, radio, and film have.
Mm.
So you don't even know, like, I think kids don't even know they're being marketed to, you know.
Well, that would be the genius of marketing, right? Is to make it where it's almost you subconsciously absorb the advertising. You don't even realize
But
it's
these are
being
kids. I
yeah.
mean, interesting. So an
Oh, it's
interesting.
insidious, but it's still marketing at its best. I mean, it's insidious, but
Oh
it's
yeah, no,
at its
absolutely.
best.
The best marketing is marketing that's not is word of mouth, that more feels like word of mouth. I mean, I thought it was interesting that I'd heard that Netflix was experimenting with advertisements, and I saw the first one the other day. I was like, oh my god, wait a second! I've never seen an ad. I'm not on my account. I'm on Baz's account.
Mm,
They weren't marketing to me. They were marketing to my kid's account.
yeah,
And of course, it was for a video game. I mean, I don't. It doesn't bother me, but there's still a part of you going like, "Oh my god!" Like, there's no rules on this.
yeah.
You know, like, is that okay for marketing to kids? Well, what age kids? I mean, I guess they're going by the age of whatever they. Yeah, they're going by what the kids are watching on. I mean, like, it's
Yes.
just. I think we're in like a whole wild west of marketing right now, especially to kids. And there's this massive rush to get onto to TikTok and Instagram and stuff to get that quick sort of boost of some kind of something. It's gone viral. It's like,
Right.
oh my
Well,
god, like,
I mean, like I said, when I think you're on YouTube, I'm on YouTube. Uh,
mm,
the big goal for someone like in my position, you already hit that goal. So it's hit 1,000 subscribers, so you can start monotonizing your content.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
content is only monotonized when it gets advertising attached to it.
right.
So that is once again that give and take. Where obviously the kids who are now obsessed with YouTube and TikTok are now going to be hit with those ads now every 30 seconds. Something's gonna
Yeah.
new things will be showing them. But at the same time, without that, there's no content.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not for want of lack of trying. I mean, I'd love to be earning vast amounts of money on YouTube, but it's never really worked for my stuff, and I'm very worried about the fact that we are creating to algorithms, right?
Hmm.
I mean, we do something and it's like, oh, nobody watched it. It didn't go viral. I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You're expressing yourself. I mean, I feel that way. I feel like the stuff I put out there is the stuff I want to put out there. I don't want to say I don't care about an audience. I would love there to be an audience for stuff, but I think there's a real danger, and you're seeing a lot of these YouTubers burning out by trying to feed the algorithm. Like they make these. Was one of the guys was talking about making these beautiful videos with scientific research and traveling around the world and all these, and research and blah blah and technology. And then the one that does the most is when they sent like a can of peanut butter to space or something. Like it's like like
Yeah.
it's I think you want to feed the if you want to be popular. It's a very different thing than being accurate and useful.
I agree. I mean, it's like I was having since I started working my current job, I've had to cut back on the amount of interviews I post a week.
Mm,
I was doing 3 and 4. Now I'm down to like 1 or 2.
right,
And so I've been doing a lot with the shorts, which are easy to cut. And you can take about 30 minutes and cut them.
right.
And I was doing them, and I had a decent amount of luck, but I wanted to get my views up. And for some reason, I decided I'm going to post a 8-second video of my dog licking ice cream off a ice cream stick. It's now my number one most
Yeah,
viewed
yeah,
short. I'm just like, it's like on the one hand, I'm thinking to myself, great, I got the views, but on the other hand, it's like, oh,
yeah. And that's the problem. I mean, that really is it. I mean, I feel like I guess it depends on why you want to do these things. Like I
right,
understand if it's a business and your goal is to get as many people in as possible. Fantastic. That's great.
right.
I mean, what I worry about though is I mean, talk about typecasting. I mean, if your dog licking ice cream is your thing, then that's all you could deliver.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if that is what your audience wants, then that is all they want. And I mean, again, nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, or there's a way of automating it or whatever, fantastic. But I mean, like it's actors are constantly being asked, like, you know, do you feel like you're being typecast because you're always playing, brilliant assholes or whatever I do, and it's like that they're worried about that, but they're not worried about the fact that they're terrified that they didn't get their video out this week, or that I just think we got to be really careful, because there's always going to be someone is always going to be there to step in when you stumble
Right.
on YouTube, right? I mean, if you have a mass, if Mr. Beast suddenly goes, I cannot freaking do this anymore, and decides to bail, YouTube doesn't care. The videos are still up there, and someone else will rush in
Yeah.
to spend their life trying to fill that, you know, and in fact, and then it'll be someone else next week anyways. I mean, I feel like we've got to be, I think you got to make sure you're doing what you want to do if you're going to do it
Right.
every freaking week, or every day for that matter. I mean,
Well, I mean, the thing is like I said, I like about doing my interviews, I still get to do them twice a week because of work. And like I said, they're a lot of fun. You get to talk to fantastic people.
that's it.
But it does kind of annoy you just a little bit where some lady doing a dance is gonna get like 20 times your view. It's like, oh
Yep.
man, like what
Yeah.
was the artistic value of that?
Yeah, that's
You
it. Or
know?
someone just happened to be there for a car crash.
Right.
Like it's or like one of the biggest channels on the internet is just a guy talking about what he's seen on the internet.
Hmm.
These are all the videos. These are like also these are the viral videos for this week. I mean, I you know I just think in the scheme of things, I think you need to consider whether this is something that you are passionate about. I mean, in your
Hmm.
situation, as you say, you get to talk to sci-fi people, you get to talk about what you love. I mean, that's, unless you have to earn a living doing that, then, I feel very fortunate because, acting still weirdly pays the bills.
Hmm.
So I'm not beholden to the algorithm stuff. Although that said, I've noticed that people want merch. I'm like, great, I'll make some merch. I love playing around with Photoshop and coming up with, ZPM t-shirts and stuff. Like, it's
But
fun.
but
Like,
like
I
I said,
like that.
and that's not. I mean, we're talking about like advertising or doing something for an algorithm. That's different though. That's someone that's enjoying the fact that someone's taking enjoyment from what
Mm.
you do. Like there's I create indie comic books and I
Oh,
made a comic book. Yeah, I mean one I did with my father was called The Nightmare Patrol, which was pretty cool. And we made T-shirts of the shirts from the comic book, right?
oh
The fact that
yeah.
people were buying the shirts, it's pretty damn cool. Someone's walking
Yeah.
around with your comic book title on their shirt
Yeah,
and all
that's
that.
it.
It's like I say that's to me that's just as cool as buying a comic book almost.
The funny thing was we used to talk about the long tail. We used to talk about the fact that there was always a market for that book, even if it only, there's people who make billions of dollars and they're at the top of the curve, and then there's very specialty specific niche books that are
Yeah,
selling one or two copies. The problem is you don't earn a living selling one or two of those books a
yeah,
year. The companies that are selling them do. So they're happy to have a long tail of lots of these books that only sell one or two copies a year, because all of those people are doing something else to earn a living. And I just worry that, I feel like when we're seeing this a lot with the streamers as well, where it started off and it was very cheap and you had access to all of
mm,
these films. Well, guess what? The money's only, it's just going to get the same thing's going to happen with AI as well. We become dependent on AI. We're using it all the time for our writing or our
yep,
school or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's $20 a month. Now it's $30 a month. And
yep.
I think we have to be careful, especially when it comes to technology. One of the other interesting things I've been looking into recently is biotech, right, which has always been a bit of a fascination for me, and the idea about the inequalities in that. Like, what happens when, like, generally people with money have access to more
Oh,
sort
I'm
of,
going to interrupt you for 1 second
yeah.
because I'm not sure what you mean by biotech, and I don't
Oh,
know.
sorry. So I'm sort of fascinated with genetic engineering and CRISPR and the whole sort of all these massive corporate mechanisms around medicine now, right? I
Okay,
mean that we are doing genetic engineering, we are doing genetic gene therapy, we are doing things to fetuses that could could potentially now be a genetic trait. Like, we have taken the reins of our own evolution now.
hmm,
The only evolutionary changes in humankind, barring some kind of catastrophe, will be made by us by choice.
Hmm.
That is a crazy position to be in. You know, we're also an evolutionary force when it comes to our, to the flora and fauna around us. I mean, we what we do and how we destroy or preserve things for our own benefit. There's a wonderful story. Sorry, I'm going to speak the email of Awesome Awesomeness back to you. But there's that wonderful story about the elephant tusks. There
Yeah.
was a that in Mozambique. There was a the 9 out of 10 elephants were slaughtered for their tusks, but there was a genetic variation or a mutant that this elephant and her offspring were being born without tusks, which
Hmm.
would have been a huge disadvantage unless humans were killing all the elephants with
Right.
tusks. We have now made in a way we've effectively made an evolutionary choice. Again, I know it's not as simple as this, but basically that species could die out except for the ones that don't have tusks.
Well, see,
Um,
I thought you were gonna
you know,
mention the Chernobyl wolves
that's
that might
right.
be, because I thought that was a fascinating. I was like, it
Yeah.
potentially is impacting the wolves, but in the long run could actually be helping people if they figure out if they're actually resistant to cancer
Yeah.
in the radiation on that. It
Like how cool is that? Like that's when I talk about genetic stuff, this is the kind of stuff that I find fascinating.
Yeah.
The idea that we're still learning all the time, and I feel like I guess my mission is almost become more about this promoting lifelong learning, because I feel like there is a tendency for most people to think of, they go to high school, they hopefully go to university if they can, and then they go to work, and it's like, well, we should really be subscribing to education, because the reality is it's changing at such a breakneck pace. And then these wolves are just a fantastic example of, again, we may have triggered this. What do they call it? Basically an evolutionary change. These wolves they're not being culled by humans.
Yeah.
They're 7 times more populous in this Chernobyl exclusion zone than in other areas in and around Ukraine, where there's now another war. Uh, and they're like, well, what was funny on YouTube was, and in the social media, was a lot of people saying like they're curing cancer. It's like, well, there's a huge jump happening there. All we've discovered is that these things seem to be thriving in an environment that we wouldn't have thought so, and that it looks like when they compare them to wolves outside of the zone, that the mutations that have occurred quite obviously have happened in either tumor resistance or some kind of cancer fighting element within these wolves' genetics that have allowed them to survive longer. Whether they're comfortable, whether they're healthy, whether they're, what I mean, they could be
Well,
just walking around in pain.
yeah, I
Right?
was just about to ask, I was like, is if they're surviving, but is the lifespans as long?
Well, this is it. This is why I worry about the immediacy. The problem with our social media society is that you want like a quick, snappy,
Yeah.
mutant wolves, and I do it all. I'm just as guilty. Like I try to come up with fun titles that mislead people into reading something, and but this idea that mutant wolves cure cancer,
Yeah.
bang, that's the front cover. That's your National Enquirer headline right there, and that will draw people in. But as a result, there are no checks and balances. So,
Hmm.
my poor son rolls his eyes every time I say this, but I'm like, give me 3 sources. Like
Hmm.
and he's like, well, no, this guy's like, he's a science YouTuber. I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, I mean, and it turns out the kid was pretty good. I mean, he was,
Well,
I mean, again, a little bit too much cancer fighting stuff, but
that's the other problem with what was happening too. I was having a debate about something going on in the world. I'm not going into too much details, but the person came to me with evidence and said, "Look at this YouTube video that proves it." I was like, "It's a YouTube video. It's not sourced.
yeah.
It's not. I don't know who these people even are." But
Mm.
this generation, I think, is just as comfortable saying YouTube and TikTok are viable sources for information as they are where we would say a book or going through a scientific art, a magazine.
Well, and what do you do? What do you do when we can't agree on basic truths? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we're there. I mean, Carl Sagan warned us about this in like whatever it was, 89 or something, where he spoke of, he said that, you get to a point where if you lose uh, the population's ability to understand what's going on and to agree on what's going on, we're going to go back to like living in caves clutching crystals, and we're back into superstitions and believing stuff that
Right.
just relates to our
And
own, and I feel like we're doing that like
well,
now.
and it's going to get worse. I mean, I remember, especially we're talking about AI. You can
Mm,
now artificially potentially create a voice. You can create instant. You can literally have someone on video
yep.
doing whatever you want them to do.
Anything you want, yeah. So
They'll
we're
look
going to
as
question.
real as any other source of historical information.
Mm.
And the only ones who will know are the ones who have the time and the effort and the access to go backtrack enough to figure out if it's
Yeah.
real or not.
And fake information can be created in split seconds,
Yeah.
whereas real, properly researched and fact-based content is going to take longer. So there is going to be a lot more crap than there is the good stuff. And then throw AI at that, and you've got the same issue. You got exactly the same issue, right? If you've got AI just putting out any old kind of story they want, which they do a lot of these now, these
Yeah.
pseudoscience stories, like the pyramids in Egypt are actually they generate electricity or something,
Yeah.
and you run with that. It all looks like legit science stuff, and it's even they've even pulled clips from things they've literally got like NASA scientists on screen while they spout this nonsense, and they're just randomly put together.
Well,
At the same time, I hope that AI will also be able to go and look at this stuff and go, whoa, this is not.
right. And it's easy to manipulate. There's a show that was on, I think it was History, could be on Discovery. Can't remember what it was exactly.
Mm,
And there's this guy who was supposed to be this archaeologist. They were showing about how, and they gave some information about how serious, but archaeology and how successful he is and all this other stuff, knowledgeable. And his theory, apparently, which according to him has been proven, that there was a super civilization that was like predates Babylon, that was like the biggest, most massive thing of all time. And
mm,
when I'm watching it, I'm watching with my wife, I'm looking at him going, there's a lot of problems with what he's saying right here. There's a lot of
mm,
information that's wrong here. But it's being delivered with such sincerity and with so much pseudo fact. And you're like, if you don't know this stuff, you're not used to knowing how to look for bullshit. This
mm,
looks legit. This looks 100% legit. I could see
mm.
myself if I was 12 years old doing a paper on, I don't know, some ancient civilization, saying,
Yeah,
my source right here, there was a civilization. I saw it on that show with a
yeah.
doctor of whatever his name was.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the book. I had a book on the abominable snowman and Noah's Ark, and it had
Yeah.
photos. And I just assumed that the Loch Ness monster was real. And I mean, it was a real book. It had
Yeah.
photos. I mean, like I think what's funny though is that I suppose to some extent with any kind of innovation you get into this, I imagine that when the printing press allowed people outside of the churches to get information out to everyone, that people were freaking out that, oh my God, like they're going to write stuff that's counter to God's
Yeah.
will, or that's going to be, obviously a very interesting thing actually, which I don't think I've done it in I think it's a possible topic for an email of awesomeness later. The Luddites, like redefining Luddites. Like Luddites weren't against the machines; they were against the fact that there were, kids working these machines, and that the people who own these production plants were basically cutting out,
Hmm.
making it impossible for people to live. So that potentially Luddites are not people who hate technology; they're just people who hate corporations that are exploiting their workers, basically.
Well, the question then is, the further we go in history, the less clear it is on what's true. Because again,
Mm,
any piece of evidence you want can be manufactured. I remember having a debate with someone online, the Comicsgate people. If you know anything about comic books, they're like the alt right of comic books, and
mm,
they're arguing a photo they showed of sales, and they showed how comic book sales were dropping. And I looked it
mm,
up and I researched it, and I found the actual image, and it wasn't what they showed. It was actually the opposite of what they showed. But they were using that, they recreated the image to show what they wanted to see. Now the
ha,
now the problem is, when it's that easy and that hard to prove against because it's so well done,
mm.
where does truth come from? That, like, at what point do you know what's true if everything around you is potentially bullshit?
And I think this is why, I mean, to bring it back to what we're both sort of fascinated by, I think this is education. And I mean, I think there's a brilliant guy, um, uh, John Mighton, who does this jump math stuff here and around the world, actually. His big thing is he says like illiteracy in math is one of the biggest issues we have because people look at numbers and just go, oh, okay, oh, 49%, oh, whatever, okay, yeah, I guess it's got to be right, or numbers that we can't conceive, they're so large. Yeah. Unless we need those analytical skills. We have to have those analytical skills, or at least the tools that allow us to do it in a way that, like, to teach that critical thinking, I guess, and mathematics are probably two of the most key things we need to instill. And I think it's at a time when these are at their like all-time low.
I do think the one thing and I'm trying to push it in my English class right now and push the teachers to it. It's like we have to somehow teach kids to question what they see and to know when there's bias and bullshit. And I think while it's fun to teach some of the stuff we're teaching history and the facts and the dates and everything else, they don't know how to actually think to know if what they're looking at is accurate. And that's where we almost need a whole class of just teaching kids how to spot bullshit and understand where bias comes. Because
I mean, and that's it. I think is having that ability having the ability and the tools at hand to figure that stuff out. We talked about this last time, but it's why I added the idea of truth from multiple perspectives to the whole idea of Tech Bandits. Is that I realized that I was just as guilty as everyone else. I had my little playground of things that I was interested in, and I was not interested in having those questions. So I think it is important for people to come in. I mean, a great example. I keep coming back to this one, but we brought a bunch of Black Widow spiders in to an elementary school, and we fired laser vibrometers at them and listened to them using lasers, right? So really fun thing. The kids loved it. Did they need to be Black Widow spiders? No, but the fact that they were Black Widow spiders meant that every freaking kid in that school knew they were there and came to look at them and learned something. Now, one of the kids came up and said, "This is illegal." And I was like, "What do you mean? Why is it illegal?" He's like, those are poisonous spiders. I said, "Oh my God, they are. But is there a law?" And so what we did was we went and we looked up the rules on what you can bring to school. And it turns out that because Black Widow spiders will not, they're not classified as a threat. They're also, they're not likely to dig in and reproduce in a school in Toronto. If they were mice, it would have been illegal, which I thought was interesting. But again, I'm going like, look at this. When you let kids show you where the learning is, because you could have just gone like, yeah, whatever, kid. Or no, it's not. I don't know. The beautiful thing about me is that I play geniuses on television and I know nothing. So I don't even have a high school education. So everything is new to me. Everything is exciting to me. I second guess all of my stuff because even if it's a freaking elementary kid who questions it, I go, I don't know, let's check it out. And I think it's also just fun to be wrong. If you're wrong, you learn something. And I think kids are also, not just kids, I think everybody has a tendency to be, I know in school for me, a lot of the stuff that held me back was I was terrified of saying something stupid. Like, oh God, I'm going to put up my hand, I'm going to answer the question, everyone's going to laugh at me. It was just easy to put up your hand and say something stupid on purpose, and then everyone laughs and no one takes you seriously. It's great. But, we need to learn how to fail and how to deal with failure, because I think we've been so sensitive to kids, especially around the pandemic. I think projecting our own insecurities, our own fears onto the kids, that I feel my concern is that they're coming through the educational system without, either feeling completely right about everything or completely wrong about everything and too scared to say anything.
Well, see, that's kind of interesting because once again, a lot of these kids who are sports fans look at the percentages. A baseball player, you hit 300, you're an all-star, but you also missed 7 out of 10 times. Got out some of those 10 times. A great basketball player, you only hit 50% from the field. It means you missed half. Football, percentage as well. When we have sports around them where it's really is, sports are basically instances of failure, but then with a great opportunity when you do it well, right? Things go well. So why can't we get kids then to buy into the fact that failure is part of that life when everything they like in sports is about failure a lot of time.
Mm. It's funny. It's definitely sort of a shift in perspective. Like I feel like when I was growing up, I always felt like I sucked at I sucked at math, I sucked at science, I sucked
Mm.
at, I always was taking stuff apart and I could never get them back together again. The reality is I was learning all the time. And looking back now and talking to people now, there's stuff I know that I don't, that people that I just assumed was common knowledge. But unless you're taking apart TVs and breaking stuff and to see how they work, you don't learn those things.
Mm.
And I think there's also, I mean, I worry a bit that this whole sort of right to repair stuff, where these companies don't want people in there messing around, that can't help but trickle down to this kind of this disposable culture that people, I think both adults and kids have, where it's like, oh, it's broken, so you throw it out and you get a new one.
Mm.
Like I think it's still very possible to take stuff apart and like break stuff. You know what I mean? Like I don't mean move fast and break stuff. I mean like let's break, like pull it apart, see what it does, and who cares if you put it back together or not? That's
Yeah.
not the point. The point is to try to learn something out of it. And I just think that's still something that I see missing in a lot. It's funny working with, we're working with fourth year biology students at U of T right now with this escape room learning stuff.
Mm.
Partially because biology to me is one of the most difficult, is one of the hardest things to fit into the idea of escape room learning. And I should probably define that better. It's basically puzzle learning. The idea is we present a class with a bunch of these sort of an envelope paper-like escape room puzzle, like murder mystery type thing. The kids have to go into groups, and they're not kids, students. The students have to get into groups and solve this thing. But that's usually where the learning ends when it comes to these things. They're usually used as a way of as a project that is then finished. My push is to say, I think the skills that are even more important are the idea of being able to build those things themselves.
Hmm.
They need to be able to, because if there's one thing I got from my disaster of an education was I got a group of friends who make films together. Still to this day, I met these guys when I was 13 years old. I still work with them now professionally. And if there was any way I could possibly create a system that might allow people to find their own communities, their own people, I could not wish that for kids more than anyone. I mean, I keep thinking of, like, in a high school play, there's a wonderful camaraderie that happens, and you've got the actors bond, the designers bond, the backstage, the lighting, the people who are drawn to those various different parts of that entertainment medium get to bond, and it's a great thing. Well, why doesn't that happen with every single part of the school? And so my dream would be, maybe in tandem with or whatever, but along with a high school play, there should be a high school escape room that has brought together all the kids who are interested in coding, all the kids who are interested in building electronic stuff, all the kids who are interested in building sets and designing things and designing puzzles, all of the actors who want to come in and play, a part in the room, all of the directors and the people who want to do video or film. I feel like there's almost no clique that can't be a part of that process. And I feel that, things like school plays and stuff, it limits it to just the quote unquote, the
drama
theater,
geeks.
the theater people, the film geeks, right? It doesn't even, but that's the whole thing. It doesn't even include the film geeks, right? Whereas I feel that escape room, the other thing is that kids now, they communicate through this kind of stuff. They communicate through the process of puzzles and solving problems. And, by the very nature of gaming online, which every kid does in some way, shape, or form, whether it's on a mobile or on a PC or console or whatever, those skills are there, and they're not being used they're not being used in the classroom. They're not being used. They're incredible. They're literally running military campaigns, or collecting things, or learning the lore necessary to do what they need to do they will research, they will do stats, they will do all of this stuff in a gaming environment. So the idea of using escape room puzzles as the thread that sort of pulls this all together, or the glue that sticks it all together, I feel is just perfectly in sync with the where kids' heads are at anyway. So I'm sort of a bit obsessed with this.
See, I know you gotta go in a few minutes, so I kind of this is a big question, so I'm kind of holding off.
How are we doing? Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
Because I was fascinated by the escape room conversation you were having on your email, awesome, as well as your YouTube video on it. And once again, as an English teacher, trying to find some way to get these kids excited about something. I definitely want to pick your brain at some point when you have time to figure out how would you get escape room into a middle school English classroom. Like, what would is there an expense issue?
What are the what books are you doing, and what are the topics?
Right now we're reading a Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream. That could be well. I mean, literally, you could have them come up with puzzles related to the play. I mean, or to Shakespeare, or to there's a really fun podcast you might want to check out called The Puzzler.
Okay.
The Puzzler podcast, and it's just literally just every week. Is it every week? Maybe it's every day. I don't even know, but there's certainly a lot of them. He just comes up with. He brings someone on, and they solve a few puzzles that he's come up with. I think there's the very simple approach on this stuff seems to be to use it as a way of quizzing kids. But I think, again, the real power of this stuff comes in when they have to create something out of it. So maybe, okay, Midsummer Night's Dream. So you're Pyramus, you're Thisbe, and you have to do the scene, but instead, or maybe there's a, but you don't, like, maybe someone knows something that two other people don't, or the audience has to figure out what the word is that they're missing, or they don't, I mean, there's just, I feel like, and again, I think what's great about it is you don't have to come up with that. I feel like the kids could probably do that. Like, you could probably sit them down and say, all right, I want to do you like escape rooms? Like, sometimes it helps to have an escape room to play. And there's some stuff I can send you some links for ones you can sort of cut and paste, and they have to solve stuff. I find a lot of them are usually designed by older people, and they have things that don't make sense to kids, like telephones with dials and stuff. But yeah, I just get excited about that because I just feel like there's, so there's the comedy stuff. So you could literally have, word puzzles. You can have, you could even have sections of the play. You got to find that section of the play in order to solve this part of stuff. Yeah, I think there's definitely stuff you could be doing with that. Well, and I think I struggle with the whole, I mean, I love the term escape room because I feel like a lot of people in the community understand that. But I think in a way, it's almost like, I think puzzle learning is probably a better way of putting it. I'd love to come up with a better term for it myself. But the idea of, like, how do you create this way of thinking in the kids' minds of saying, okay, like, this book is now useful to me, right? This book is useful to me because it holds the clues to this puzzle. And I think that immediately equates some kind of a learning process with something that is of active use to them. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's the fun there, I think. But often the kids will come up with stuff, that I would never have thought of. Like, they've got, maybe they're doing TikTok. You got to guess what character they are, or what they, well, is that a modern day version of whatever.
I'd be fascinated with what you come up with. Your challenge is going to be, obviously, class size is going to be an issue because you're dealing with about 28 to 30 kids.
Right.
They all need to participate, and obviously we'll need to prove to the deans and whatnot that this is a valuable use of their time.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night, sir.
All the best, man. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Versing the Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure you return for the next episode when Jerry Carita returns to the mothership to discuss his new book. Till the next voyage, travel on.